Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're doing a dive into a really powerful and definitely provocative book. It's The Enemy Within: How a Totalitarian Movement is Destroying America, and the author is David Horowitz.
Our job here is to explore the main arguments Horowitz puts forward. We want to understand his claims straight from the text.
He makes some very strong assertions, and our goal isn't to agree or disagree, but just to lay out what he contends is happening, so you get a clear grasp of his specific viewpoint and the evidence he uses to back it up.
Horowitz argues America is facing its biggest crisis since the Civil War. And he says this threat comes from what he calls a reactionary ideology on the ideological left.
And he puts a name on it: identity politics, though he says it's better understood in his view as cultural Marxism.
He describes that framework as being inherently racial and collectivist, so groups over individuals.
And that it demonizes certain categories.
Precisely. He lists them as oppressor categories: white Americans, males, Christians, Jews. He argues this whole worldview is fundamentally opposed to what he sees as America's core principles: individual freedom, accountability, equality.
Interesting. And he traces the roots of this. Where does he say political correctness comes from?
But he actually traces it back to Mao Zedong. And he also brings in the Combahee River Collective's manifesto.
Which is a key text in Black feminist thought. How does he use that?
Well, Horowitz uses it to argue that identity politics started as an anti-American Marxist ideology that was, in his words, dedicated to America's destruction, aiming, as he sees it, to tear down capitalism, imperialism, and patriarchy.
Okay, so not just a theory, but a movement seeking real control.
Yes, he calls it totalitarian control. He claims identity politics sees everything, even like pronouns, as political.
And therefore needing management.
Exactly. He believes that it erases individuals by judging them first on race, gender, sexual orientation, not their actions or merits.
And this leads him to challenge that idea of the oppressor narrative, right?
Yeah. He directly takes on the phrase, white male Christians need to step back. He calls that transparent bigotry.
So his argument against it is...
It's basically that this narrative ignores history, ignores individual agency, and just stirs up resentment, undermining, American unity.
He also pushes back on the idea that Black Americans are marginalized. How does he argue that?
He points to their visibility in culture, positions of power. He notes that, in his view, many Black Americans are middle class or, frankly, better off than people in many Black-run countries.
Which he uses to counter claims of widespread marginalization.
And that connects directly to his view on systemic racism. He calls the whole idea of systemic racist oppression a fiction.
A fiction? That's strong.
It's used to excuse failure and give social justice advocates this false sense of moral superiority.
And he points to
achievements by women, by minorities in top U.S. leadership roles, a Black president, national security chiefs, secretaries of state. He says these things contradict the systemic oppression narrative.
He argues that white Christian males were key in condemning slavery first and setting up the framework for equality.
That's part of his historical argument, yes.
Okay, so that's the core thesis. How does he see this playing out? Where are the manifestations of this movement?
Well, he starts with education. K-12 schools, universities.
Right. He claims cultural Marxism is basically the core curriculum now, for generations even.
And he gets specific. He mentions whiteness studies programs. He claims they teach that whiteness itself is evil.
Citing that motto, treason to whiteness is loyalty to humanity.
And he gives another example, a curriculum in Santa Barbara called Forms of Oppression.
With $1 million budget, he says.
Apparently. He describes it as dividing people neatly into privileged oppressor: men, white people, heterosexuals, wealthy, Christians.
And target victim, women, people of color, LGBTQ, working class, poor, others.
Right. Horowitz argues this whole setup just incites envy, resentment, hatred. He contrasts it really sharply with American ideals of individual responsibility.
He even calls the term people of color racist.
Designed to demonize white people. He adds that, historically, non-white groups also practiced slavery.
Which brings him to white skin privilege. He challenges that concept, too.
He argues that the idea of unearned access ignores things like affirmative action, which he claims discriminates against white and Asian individuals in admissions and jobs.
And he uses stop and frisk as an example.
It was about behavior, not race. He cites crime stats from New York,
saying Black and Hispanic people commit more violent crime proportionally.
That's the statistic he presents. So he suggests any white privilege in that context is, quote, earned, because, according to his numbers, whites are less involved in violent crime.
That's definitely his interpretation of those stats. He also talks about intersectionality and critical race theory.
Right. He traces intersectionality to Kimberly Crenshaw and critical race theory, or CRT, to Derek Bell. And he makes a point of noting Bell's admiration for Louis Farrakhan, highlighting a quote where Bell called Farrakhan a great hero.
And Horowitz uses this connection
To claim it reveals, in his words, the virulent racism at the core of the theory.
And what about efforts to combat intersectional oppression in science and tech fields? STEM.
Well, despite the funding for those programs, Horowitz argues representation differences are due to choices, not discrimination. He cites studies.
And he brings up James Dimore, the Google memo guy.
Yes, as evidence, in his view, of an ideological monolith that crushes dissenting opinions.
The book also dedicates space to Ta-Nehisi Coates. How does Horowitz frame him?
He portrays Coates as someone who benefited greatly from racial preferences.
Pointing to his prestigious role as NYT columnist, MIT lecturer, Atlantic editor, that MacArthur Genius Grant.
Right, all despite not having a college degree. Horowitz uses Coates' success to question claims of black marginalization.
And he engages with Coates' writing.
He discusses Coates describing white America as a syndicate, a criminal enterprise. He also criticizes how Coates framed the Prince Jones shooting. Horowitz calls it racist paranoia, and Coates' argument about black-on-black crime being jargon.
Jargon to obscure blame from dreamers, as Coates puts it.
And then there's reparations. Horowitz calls Coates' advocacy for it racial extortion.
Why extortion?
He argues it was rejected by major civil rights groups back in the 60s.
Why did they reject it?
Partly because the government they'd hold responsible had already defeated the slavery power, and also because most Americans today came here after abolition.
He brings up Zora Neale Hurston, too.
Yes, her perspective on Africans selling other Africans into slavery.
And he criticizes mixing up the colonial era with the U.S. founding.
Arguing it erases the Declaration's promise of equality and liberty for all.
Okay, shifting gears slightly. Black Lives Matter. His description is white strong.
Extremely strong. He calls BLM a racist and violent vigilante group. That's a direct quote.
And his evidence for that.
He cites examples of chants like, "What do we want? Dead cops," and alleges activists used offensive slurs, quoting one particularly vile one aimed at white people.
He also uses statistics regarding police killings.
Yes, suggesting that whites are actually more likely to be killed by police if you adjust for homicide rates.
And he criticizes President Obama's support for BLM.
Claims it led, predictably, to more criminal violence. He also lists big funders Ford Foundation, George Soros' Open Society Institute.
Okay, then he moves on to the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings.
He frames that whole episode as a war waged by the radicals against American principles and institutions.
Alleging mob rule by Democrats and activists.
And he argues the Believe Women slogan completely bypassed the presumption of innocence.
He points to what he sees as inconsistencies in Christine Blasey Ford's testimony.
Like the fear of flying, the second front door details. He says senators didn't challenge these for fear of being called sexist.
So he views the whole thing as a staged drama.
A morality play, he calls it, designed to cast Kavanaugh as an anti-woman predator.
This connects to his broader concerns about censorship, doesn't it? Particularly in academia.
Absolutely. He claims liberal arts colleges have been colonized by radicals,
Leading to a one-party academic faculty.
where conservative views have virtually vanished. He uses Heather McDonald's experiences with campus protests as an example, shouting down speakers, that sort of thing.
He even cites data suggesting most public colleges don't protect free speech.
Over 90%. He also talks about the attempt to cancel Tucker Carlson via advertiser boycotts.
Arguing Carlson's comments on immigration were twisted.
And then he really goes after the Southern Poverty Law Center, the SPLC.
Calling it a slander machine. Why?
He argues they exaggerate the threat from fringe hate groups and then lump mainstream conservatives in with them. The SPLC listing groups like the American Enterprise Institute or people like Ben Carson as hate mongers.
He also brings up the settlement paid to Majid Nawaz.
The $3.4 million settlement, yes. And his own experience being labeled by the SPLC as an anti-Muslim fanatic and anti-black.
Wow. He also talks about financial blacklisting.
But credit card companies, social media platforms, Google, Facebook, Twitter, using vague terms like hate speech, he says, to ban users and info sources whenever they want.
Calling it the largest blacklisting effort in modern times.
That's his phrase for it, yes.
So all these threads, education, media, activism, censorship, lead him to focus on the Democrat Party itself.
Yes, he argues the party is waging a war on America. He claims anti-American hatred is now a major trend within the party.
He references Jeane Kirkpatrick's old Blame America First party label.
He accuses Democrats of betraying the Iraq war effort for political reasons and then launching the resistance against Trump.
He calls
The most dangerous sedition in American history since the Civil War. Very strong language.
And he points to specific policy pushes.
Calls to get rid of the Electoral College, the Senate. He argues these are anti-democratic attacks on institutions the founders designed to prevent tyranny of the majority.
He mentions Senator Schumer, too.
Cites Schumer's threats against Justices Kavanaugh and Gorsuch as an attack on the Republic's foundations.
So the ideological shift in academia has led to
A politicized media and judiciary, and a Democrat Party pushing socialist programs aimed at redistributing wealth, sometimes on a racial basis.
and the summer 2020 riots.
He claims Democrat officials defended and applauded them as peaceful protests, despite billions in damage, hundreds of police injuries.
Noting that the cities most affected were run by Democrats.
Right, and he reiterates his view that the Black Lives Matter campaign is a racial hoax,
Based on crime and police statistics.
arguing police killings of black individuals are proportional to their involvement in violent crime, and that black-on-white crime is much higher than the reverse.
He criticizes Al Sharpton's knee on our neck speech.
Calls it a reprehensible racist lie that ignores opportunities available to black Americans.
And the pulling down of statues. Washington, Jefferson, Grant, Lincoln.
He sees that as part of an anti-American agenda, alongside the defund the police movement,
He even brings in the COVID-19 response.
arguing Democrats politicized it, downplayed China's role, called Trump's travel ban racist, and used deaths as a political weapon. Also, Democrat-run areas had worse COVID outcomes.
Which brings us finally to the 2020 election.
Right. Horowitz lays out what he calls overwhelming evidence of election fraud. Prima facie evidence, he says.
What kind of evidence?
Things like Biden's vote increases being implausible compared to Obama's numbers, the House election results showing a red wave, those bellwether counties that usually predict the winner going for Trump.
He also talks about changes to election laws.
Illegal changes made by state courts, and he mentions fractional voting capabilities in Dominion machines, citing Dr. Shiva Ayadurai.
And the courts didn't hear the fraud cases?
They refused because of procedural objections or out of fear of violence.
How does he explain January 6th?
He attributes the riot to anger over the election, the destruction of the freedom to vote, plus frustration after a summer of mainly unpunished left-wing riots.
And the subsequent deplatforming of Trump.
He criticizes that heavily, arguing it puts immense power over public discourse into the hands of two Silicon billionaires.
So wrapping it all up, Horowitz's conclusion is pretty stark.
Extremely stark. He says America faces the most serious threat of the establishment of such tyranny in its history.
And this threat comes from
within. From a political faction that calls its reactionary creed progressive.
He identifies specific ideologies.
Yes, things like critical race theory and anti-racism. He labels them racist ideologies that demonize white people and use cancel culture to silence dissent and dismantle the constitutional order.
So after hearing all that, the picture Horowitz paints is of a nation really on the edge, isn't it? Facing a potential slide into totalitarianism with core values like individual freedom, due process, free speech under serious threat.
That's certainly the vision he presents. It's intense.
It really is, and it leaves you thinking. When an author presents such a detailed, alarming vision of internal threats focused on these specific ideologies and movements, what individual liberties or societal norms do you think are the most critical ones to defend if faced with such a perceived challenge? Something to definitely mull over.